One thing about me is I love a good plane movie. Not a movie that you watch on the plane or a movie that has planes in it, but a movie where the entire thing takes place on a plane. I'd already seen a lot of the famous plane movies like Red Eye or Flight Plan, but I thought I'd do a deeper dive on the genre and see if we could figure out what is the best plane movie ever made. Planes have been a fixture of cinema since it began. In fact, the first film to ever win Best Picture at the Oscars was a movie about planes. The 1927 silent film Wings follows fighter pilots in World War I and features many scenes of aerial dogfights. Wings was arguably the first aviation movie in cinema history, which meant that they had to literally invent the technology they needed to shoot the movie. They engineered new camera rigs to attach to the planes, and all the lead actors flew the planes themselves. The result is some pretty spectacular aerial scenes that, to be honest, look a lot better than some of the films that come out today, nearly 100 years later. Nowadays, a lot of the plane stuff in films is done with CGI for budgetary and safety concerns. Except if you're Tom Cruise. Throughout the next few decades, there was no shortage of airplane films set during either World War I or World War II. Prolific aviator and filmmaker Howard Hughes made Hell's Angels, another landmark of the genre, and Hollywood star Jimmy Stewart made basically any aviation film that came across his desk. If the script had a plane in it, Jimmy was doing the movie. While these popular films featured planes in them, they weren't plane movies. It wasn't until the 1950s that airline travel became more affordable for the everyday person that we started to see films set on commercial airplanes. William A. Wellman, the director of Wings, and a man who I'd hate to say his name 5 times fast, William A. Wellman, William A. Wellman, William A. Wellman, William A. Wellman, William A. Wellman. He made a movie called The High and the Mighty with John Wayne in 1954, which was set on a commercial flight that faced catastrophic engine failure while flying over the Pacific Ocean. The film was pretty popular at the time, but it wasn't until 1970 that the plane movie really took off. Pardon the pun. In 1970, the movie Airport was released. It was based on a best-selling novel of the same name and follows an airport manager trying to keep the airport open during a severe snowstorm, as well as a suicide bomber on one of the flights. If that sounds exciting to you, I can assure you it's not. Let me just say it's more about the snowstorm than the suicide bomber, because apparently the weather is a more exciting plot point. I don't know. Watching this movie was a bit of a slog, to be honest, and it got mixed reviews at the time, but improbably, it was a huge hit at the box office. This movie made $126 million worldwide in the year 1970, which, for context, in the year 2025 is over $1 billion. That's literally Avengers money. Except the airport movies didn't have Tony Stark. They had something better. They had Vice President of Airport Operations, Joe Petroni. Which is actually way cooler than Iron Man, if you think about it. He's an everyday hero. America had well and truly been diagnosed with airport fever, and they made 3 sequels to the film throughout the 70s, one of which of course starred Jimmy Stewart. They even had the Airport 77 experience at Universal Studios, where they recreated 5 sets from the film and videotaped audience members recreating scenes from the movie. The scenes included a flooded cargo hold of a jumbo jet, a passenger cabin that literally shakes and rocks, and a jump to safety in a water tank, which is really an extraordinary amount of commitment for a theme park show. Like, imagine your friend tells you they're going to see the theme park show and then they come out dripping wet. You'd be like, what the hell happened in there? The series also spawned its own parody film, Airplane, which I'd say has probably endured more than the airport movies themselves. The success of Airplane and the fact that it was poking fun at movies like Airport meant that it kind of killed the genre of the plane movie for a bit. Basically, what I'm saying is they unfortunately never made another airport movie. But maybe one day we'll get that Joe Petroni spinoff. It wasn't until the 1990s that the genre started to re-emerge. Die Hard 2 in 1990 was set at an airport. Wesley Snipes made Passenger 57 in 1992.
You ever play roulette?
On occasion.
Well, let me give you a word of advice. Always bet on black.
And Kurt Russell made Executive Decision in 1996. In 1997, we even got 2 enduring classics of the genre, Conair and Air Force One. And these are the first movies that I want to talk about in a bit more depth. Conair stars Nicolas Cage as an army ranger who serves 8 years in prison after accidentally killing a man during a bar fight. His lawyers tell him he'll probably get off with a warning if he pleads guilty, but the judge gets him with this classic legal loophole.
With your military skills, you are a deadly weapon, and
and are not subject to the same laws as other people.
Anyway, flash forward 8 years, he's getting out of prison and he's getting a flight home with some of the most dangerous and notorious criminals. They end up hijacking the plane, and Nick Cage is the criminal with a heart of gold trying to stop things from the inside. The first and most important thing you need to know about this film is that it's directed by Simon West, the director of the Angelina Jolie Tomb Raider films. So it's a bit camp. Nick Cage has probably the strongest and most ridiculous head of hair that I've ever seen him with in a film, and John Malkovich is also pretty amazing as a character called Cyrus the Virus, the mastermind behind the hijacking.
Welcome to Conair.
The whole setup of the film is pretty ridiculous, but what I love about this is that it knows that it's silly. The film really has it all. They have Dave Chappelle's body crushing a car from 10,000 feet. They have Steve Buscemi playing this weird Hannibal Lecter style murderer. And halfway through the film, they pick up this fabulous androgynous prisoner whose name is revealed in the credits as Sally Can't Dance. Now, I'd like to propose a little criteria that we can use to evaluate these films because they all seem to use similar differentiators. So the first criteria is the twist. How are they making the plane scenario exciting? In Conair, it's the prison plane, which I really love. Like, yeah, flying already sucks without having to sit next to a mass murderer. Although I will say they do seem to get pretty decent legroom on board, and the seating arrangement is kind of giving premium economy. So it's not all bad. The next criteria is supporting cast. These movies always have a big star at their center, but they usually also have a colorful cast of passengers to round out the film. And Conair does a pretty good job of this. We have the great Ving Rhames, Steve Buscemi, Danny Trejo, John Cusack, and of course, Sally Can't Dance. So for supporting cast, I'm going to give this movie an A. The next criteria I'm going to use is time spent on the plane. So what percentage of the runtime actually takes place on the plane? In Conair, they get on and off the plane a few times, and there's a bit of an intro before they get on the plane as well. In total, they spend 1 hour and 3 minutes of the film's runtime on the plane, which equates to 58.6% of the runtime. Now, the last criteria is how do they land the plane in the film? Because the landing always seems to be interesting in these. In Conair, they land the plane on the Vegas Strip and crash it into a casino, which I think is pretty awesome. They also at one point tow a car in midair, which is also pretty awesome. So to recap, Conair's twist is that it's a prison plane. They get an A for supporting cast. It's 58.6% of the runtime on the plane. And for the landing, they crash into a casino. So overall, using a rating system defined by the class of cabins on a plane, I'm going to call this one first class. That's the highest rating. And now to discuss the other high concept plane thriller from 1997. Air Force One. The movie follows Harrison Ford as the president, who's the only person not captured when terrorists take over Air Force One. The movie is a pretty blatant Die Hard ripoff, but when the idea is Harrison Ford as the president and it's Die Hard on a plane, I'm on board. Ridiculousness highlights from this film include a shootout in the plane cabin, like no one cares about depressurizing the plane, as well as President Harrison Ford punching the hell out of some terrorists. And maybe the ridiculousness highlight when the plane refueling Air Force One blows up in midair while President Harrison Ford is dangling out of the cargo hold. It's really a beautiful mind that came up with this stuff. The spectacle is kind of contrasted with this weirdly boring subplot where Vice President Glenn Close is dealing with the constitutional implications of Harrison Ford being kidnapped. The movie definitely gets the most out of its B-movie premise, and even though it's corny, it does ultimately climax in one of the best one-liners in cinema history.
Get off my plane.
Get off my plane. So let's discuss this film using the rubric. The first one is the twist. We're on Air Force One and Harrison Ford is the president. The second is the supporting cast. In this movie, we have Glenn Close playing the vice president. We have Gary Oldman as the lead terrorist doing a pretty good Russian accent.
This is bullshit.
And randomly, William H. Macy is there playing an Air Force major. I'm going to give this movie a B- for supporting cast because it's mainly Glenn Close doing the heavy lifting here. And now there's time spent on the plane. They get on the plane within 12 minutes of the movie starting, and they're on the plane until the very end of the film. That means they're on the plane for about 1 hour 46 of the film's runtime, which is approximately 90%. That's our highest yet. And finally, it's the landing of the plane. Now, Air Force One doesn't land in this movie. It crashes into the ocean after one of the engines is taken out and no one can fly the plane. They try to teach President Harrison Ford to do it over the phone, but he just says to them,
You have to trim it out. How do I do that?
Completely useless. It's like trying to help your grandparent with their iPad over the phone. It's impossible. So the crash itself is pretty spectacular, but there's another insane sequence at the end where everyone zip lines from one plane to another. And not to nitpick, but I feel like getting dragged behind a plane on a zip line would really hurt. But anyway, for landing, we'll say crashed into the ocean with the zip line. And overall, I'll rate this movie as business class, because I do think it's a lot of fun. Both Conair and Air Force One were box office successes, and maybe we would have got some more ridiculous high concept plane movies in the years following it. But obviously in 2001, there was a pretty big historical event involving planes in the US. And it kind of killed the genre for a bit, understandably. But then in 2005 and 2006, we got heaps of plane movies. In those 2 years alone, we got Flight Plan, Red Eye, Snakes on a Plane, and United 93. So why the sudden surge in plane movies? Obviously 9/11 meant that people felt way more vulnerable and scared when flying, and these films really tried to tap into that fear. There was now way more security to go through at airports, which obviously just makes people nervous automatically, and the expansion of the Air Marshal program meant there was more dramatic potential for films set on planes. 2006 was also the first time major American films actually dealt directly with 9/11. Nicolas Cage played a firefighter in World Trade Center, and director Paul Greengrass depicted the hijacking of United 93. But it wasn't just because of 9/11 that we started getting all these plane movies. The early 2000s also saw a rise in thriller films where the entire thing takes place in one location. In 2002, there was Panic Room and Phone Booth, and in 2004, there was Saw. All of these films were modest hits. Saw was even a big hit, but they were also popular with studios because they were pretty cheap to make and offered a decent return. So it was this combination of post-9/11 anxieties, as well as audiences' willingness to have fun with single location films, that led to this plane-essence of 2005 and 2006. The first one I want to talk about is the most 9/11-y of this period that doesn't actually cover 9/11. Flight Plan stars Jodie Foster as an aviation engineer who travels from Berlin to New York after her husband dies in an accident. She's joined on the flight by her daughter, but she takes a nap and finds her daughter missing when she wakes up. Jodie's running around the plane being like, "Where is my daughter?" But then we get the twist of the century when the flight attendant informs her,
"We don't have any record of your daughter ever having been on board."
So Jodie just kind of keeps running around the plane looking for her. And when I say running around the plane, she is running. Like, she is racing down those aisles like a crazy person.
I need to talk to the captain. You will go back.
Hey.
Like, relax. Chill. But anyway, Jodie gets help from the air marshal on board, played by Peter Sarsgaard, as well as the pilot, played by Sean Bean. They can't find her daughter anyway, and they start to think that she might be a terrorist trying to hold the plane hostage. What I love about this particular movie is that we get to see a lot of random little areas of the plane. Because Jodie Foster's character is an aviation engineer, she's always like, "I know the plane. I designed it." There's all these like little trap doors and hidden closets that lead to these big areas underneath the plane. And look, I'm not an aviation engineer, I will admit that, but according to Google, this is not very accurate. Like, yeah, I do think it's unlikely that there's a ginormous server room underneath the seats on the plane, because the airlines would probably charge us extra for sitting in the server room, am I right? I do also want to mention how great Jodie Foster is in this film. I obviously love her in any film, but it's great to see her in something like this where it's a little corny. She can just kind of run around and be like, "I'm not crazy."
You're crazy. You're all crazy.
As I said, this movie isn't directly about 9/11, but it does deal with a lot of the impacts of 9/11. The movie touches on the rise in Islamophobia that surged after 9/11, and also taps into that fear that everyone had, like, what if you got on a plane and you were branded as a terrorist for no reason? That is actually kind of what happened to my mum when we went through airport security once, and they stopped her because she tried to bring a jar of peanut butter on the plane, which is apparently not allowed, because peanut butter is classified as a gel on an airplane. Ridiculous. Jodie Foster, make a movie about that. Now I have a few rubric elements to discuss for this one, so let's get into it. For the twist in this one, it's missing daughter. In terms of time spent on the plane, Jodie gets on the plane at 11 minutes into the film and she gets off at 1 hour 27, which equates to 84% of the runtime. To talk about the supporting cast, it's not amazing, but it's not terrible. We have Peter Sarsgaard as the prickly air marshal, we have Sean Bean as the captain, and we have this kind of shady flight attendant.
We've got a first to report. Seems our aircraft is big enough to lose a child in.
There's also notable gay icon Matt Bomer in his first ever film role. So overall, I'm going to give this a C for supporting cast. And to cover the landing side of things, well, spoiler alert, it turns out that Jodie's being framed by flight attendant Peter Sarsgaard. So they land the plane normally, but then Jodie does actually blow up the plane in her fight with Peter Sarsgaard at the end, which is not doing well for her reputation as a terrorist. Like, she blew up the plane. She blew it up. And again, I'm not an aviation engineer, but I feel like blowing up a plane that has jet fuel on board is a bad idea. But who am I? Who am I to say anything? So overall, I'm going to rate this movie as business class, which is kind of generous. Overall, I just think it's a pretty decent thriller that does lose its way by the end, but it's fun. I feel like mums actually love this movie. Definitely watch it with your mum. I think she will like it. Now, the next movie we're going to discuss is Red Eye. Released within a month of flight plan, Red Eye follows Rachel McAdams as a hotel manager who's held hostage on her flight by her seat neighbor, Cillian Murphy. This film does something really cool where it kind of starts out as a rom-com where they have a meet cute at the airport and then they kind of flirt when it turns out they're sitting next to each other. But when they take off, Cillian's character reveals himself to be a terrorist and the turn is really chilling. I think this movie is another really decent B movie. It manages to draw out a really good amount of tension from its premise, and just like Flight Plan, it does lose its way by the end, but it's still fun. Also, it is amazing that even though Cillian is playing a terrorist, he manages to just look absolutely gorgeous at every turn.
You tell the flight attendant and your dad dies.
Like, towards the end of the movie, he gets stabbed in the neck with a pen and it doesn't even really bother him. He just uses it as an opportunity to accessorize with a neck scarf. He can't not be gorgeous. I do also have to bring your attention to a few other things in the film. I think the real horror of this film is that these two spend the entire flight with their goddamn reading light on. That would piss me off. Like, turn it off. There's also another really chilling moment when Rachel McAdams goes to the bathroom and she not only touches the toilet seat with her hand, she also drinks from the sink. Everyone knows you can't drink from the sink on a plane. Like, I don't know what that water is, but I'm assuming it's like from a gutter somewhere, or it's recycled piss. I don't know. Like, Rachel's character survives the events of the film, but I'm assuming she died of a bacterial infection a few days later from the sink water. Now, to apply the rubric to this film. For the twist, it's being held hostage on the plane by your seatmate. In terms of time spent on the plane, it's 42 minutes out of the 85-minute runtime, which is about 50% of the film's runtime. For supporting cast, it's also not great in terms of the people who are actually on the plane. The highlights are this little girl who seems to hate Cillian Murphy, this random lady who loves Dr. Phil, and this random extra who looks like Colonel Sanders. The great Brian Cox plays Rachel McAdams' dad, and this will probably only be interesting to about 10 people, but I do have to mention that one of the Secret Service agents at the end of the film is played by Colby from Survivor. If you get it, you get it. So unfortunately for the supporting cast of this film, I'm going to have to give it a D. Now for the landing. They actually land the plane normally in this film. There's even a really funny joke when Cillian Murphy's character does that really icky thing of clapping when the plane lands. However, Rachel McAdams' character does literally run off the plane, which I feel like in a post 9/11 world, she definitely would have been shot or something. They do call airport security on her, but she manages to avoid them by taking off her blouse. She's a master of disguise. Anyway, overall, I'm going to rate Red Eye as business class. Now, the last movie in this 2000s trend of plane movies is a difficult one to talk about. Unfortunately, I'm not able to finish this video without talking about snakes on a plane. Now, for those who haven't seen it, this movie basically asks the question of what if there were snakes on a plane? I'll be honest, I found this really difficult to watch because I hate snakes. I hate them. One time I saw one out in the wild in Tasmania and I screamed and cried and I still have nightmares about it, and it was years ago. So I'll be honest, I didn't watch the whole movie. I just couldn't. From what I did see though, the movie has this really interesting plot where basically the snakes get on the plane and then they bite someone's nipple and then they bite someone's dick and then someone's eye and then someone's tongue, etc., etc. It's really interesting. So let me just skip forward and apply the rubric to this one. The twist for this movie is snakes. The proportion of the movie on the plane is 88%, which is pretty high. The supporting cast includes Kenan Thompson, Bobby Cannavale, and even the good wife herself, Juliana Margulies. The landing in this one is admittedly pretty great. The cockpit is full of snakes and the pilot is dead, so they deliberately depressurize the plane to suck the snakes out. And then Kenan Thompson's character steps up to land the plane because he's played over 2,000 hours of Microsoft Flight Simulator. And he does it, which leads Samuel L. Jackson to say,
All praises to the PlayStation!
which, yeah, period. I love Fortnite. So overall, I recognize that this movie's supposed to just be trashy fun, but I couldn't finish it, so I'm gonna have to give it economy class. I'm sorry. I was just really scared of the snakes on the plane. Snakes on a Plane is the last big example of a plane movie from this period, and after this, it seems like the genre kind of died again. It's worth noting that Snakes on a Plane did underperform at the box office, but there was also another mode of transportation taking over cinema in 2006. I'm talking, of course, about the movie Cars. We also got a bunch of other car movies like Speed Racer, Death Race, Death Proof, Fast and Furious, and then I guess everything just kind of looped back around because then they made the spin-off to Cars, Planes. But correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think anyone saw Planes. I certainly didn't. So the genre went on a bit of a break after 2006, and the next major plane movie that I could find is NonStop from 2014. The film follows Liam Neeson as an alcoholic air marshal who starts receiving threatening texts that someone on the plane will die every 20 minutes unless they get money. This movie is a lot like Flight Plan in that it's a thriller with lots of twists and turns. There's just sort of more fighting in this movie. Highlights from this movie include a scene where Liam Neeson fights basically every single person on the plane at once. The reveal that the other air marshal on the plane is carrying a briefcase full of cocaine. Another reveal later in the movie that it's not just cocaine, but something way cooler. A bomb covered in cocaine. And there's even a scene where Liam Neeson does the most confrontingly realistic yawn in cinematic history. There's also a really hilarious part at the end of the film when shit is going down on the plane and Liam Neeson gets taken out by the drinks cart. So for the rubric, the twist of this film is that it's a text message plane terrorist. In terms of time spent on the plane, there's only 10 minutes of this film that aren't on the plane, so it's 90% of the runtime. For supporting cast, you will never believe it, but this movie has 2 Oscar winners in it. Of course, we have Julianne Moore as Liam Neeson's seatmate, but we also have Lupita Nyong'o playing a flight attendant. She has like 5 lines in the film, and she obviously shot it before 12 Years a Slave came out, but this movie does technically count as her follow-up to her Oscar-winning performance. Supporting cast highlights also include Corey Stoll, Scoot McNairy, Shea Wiggum, and Michelle Dockery, which all sound like fake names. So you know what? I'm actually going to have to give this movie an A for supporting cast, because that's pretty good. And for the landing, it's a big crash landing in this movie, and it's pretty well done, and it even involves Julianne Moore and Liam Neeson trying to stop this little girl from being sucked out of the plane, which is kind of funny, but great. So overall, I'm going to rate this movie as premium economy. Like, it's a bit better than economy. It's got a bit of class. So there we go, guys. That is a pretty exhaustive list of all the airplane movies that I know. Please let me know your favorite plane movie in the comments and if you think I missed any big ones. As far as I can tell, NonStop in 2014 was the last major plane movie, so I think we're really due for another one. Bye!